be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So Matthew tells us that when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain and he sat down and he taught. That detail matters. Jesus did not begin the Sermon on the Mount from a throne or a fortress or a position of dominance, but he sits. He looks at people who are tired, occupied, living under violence and uncertainty, and he opens his mouth not with commands, but with blessings. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor, those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. These are not a list of spiritual achievements. This was a naming of reality. Jesus is not telling people how to become blessed. He's telling people who they already are and telling them that God is close to them. In a world that says that we matter if we're powerful or productive or certain or loud, Jesus says, you matter when you are emptied, when you're grieving, when you're gentle in a brutal world. And that was radical then, and it's radical now. Because let's be honest about the world we're living in. We watch war and human catastrophe unfold in real time on our phones. We watch migrants flee violence and climate disaster only to be met with fear and rejection, and the list goes on. And in the middle of all of it, the message we hear is be strong, protect your own, don't show weakness. But Jesus says something else. Blessed are those who mourn. Not get over it, or look on the bright side, or be grateful it's not worse. But blessed are those who refuse to numb themselves to suffering. In a culture that moves quickly past tragedy, Jesus calls mourning holy, because grief is not failure, it is fidelity. It means that your heart is still open. Blessed are the meek. Now, meekness is not passivity. It is strength without violence. It is restraint in a world that rewards domination. It is choosing not to crush others even when you could. Meekness looks like teachers and caregivers and parents and therapists and advocates whose labor is invisible but essential. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, not for comfort, not politeness, but righteousness, especially in the book of Matthew, is about right relationship, a world set right with God. And so to hunger and thirst for righteousness is to feel unsettled when systems exploit. It is to notice who is missing from the table and to ask why some lives are protected and others are treated as expendable. And Jesus blesses that restlessness. Blessed are the merciful. Now, I've learned grace to be receiving what you do not deserve, and mercy is not receiving what you do deserve, right? So grace, receiving what you do not deserve, God's love. Mercy, not receiving what you do deserve. And mercy then disrupts cycles of punishment. In a time when public discourse is dominated by outrage and humiliation, mercy is countercultural. It says, others may seek to destroy, but we seek to build up. Blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers, not people who avoid conflict, but peacemakers who are actively working for repair. And peacemaking costs something. It requires imagination, it requires listening across difference, and it requires believing that another way is possible, even when violence feels inevitable. And it means you probably have to give something up. And finally, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Not for being cruel, not for being self-righteous, but blessed are those who are choosing love, justice, and truth in systems that resist them. And this is where the Beatitudes stop being comforting for those tired and meek and merciful folks and start being challenging. Because Jesus is honest. He sees that living this way will put you at odds with the world as it is. If you refuse to look away, if you tell the truth, if you insist on justice with compassion, if you make peace instead of profit, there will be resistance. So when Jesus says, rejoice and be glad, he's not asking suffering people to pretend that it doesn't hurt. This is not joy as denial, it is joy as defiance. The refusal to believe that the story is over, and this is the way that it just has to be. Because many of us feel overwhelmed by the onslaught of news. And it feels like your spirits are poor, or you're mourning, or you ache for a world that looks like God's dream, nothing like what it does today. And so Jesus looks at you and says, blessed are you. Not because the suffering is good, but because God is near you. Because love is still alive. Because the story is not finished. And because even now, especially now, the reign of God is being born among the least, the grieving, the gentle, and those who are brave enough to hope. Jesus isn't saying these words to tell people what to do, but to see them where they're at and encourage them for what you are already doing, or what is already happening. That the reign of God is being born among the least, the grieving, the gentle, and the brave enough to hope. For that, we give thanks. Amen.